And now I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Building Hard Tech Skills as a Liberal Arts Degree Holder. Our presenter today is alumna Emily Lagattolla. She is a college and career mentor at Wildcard Mentorship. Her experiences teaching English literature and mathematics in Mexico and in the United States have helped cultivate her lifelong love of learning. She studied at the University of Chicago, Lambda School coding bootcamp, and her kitchen table, like many of us. And now that is plenty for me. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Emily.
Thanks a lot, Sam. All right, awesome. So today I'm talking to you about building hard tech skills as someone who may not be techie. So it's kind of funny, the actual title, Building Hard Tech Skills as a Liberal Arts Degree Holder, applies to everyone who graduated from the college because we all hold liberal arts degrees. So it's not quite as narrow as it might sound, because we all can stand to advance in our, what I call hard tech skills. So basically I want to emphasize that the core is such a valuable philosophy, I would say, because I studied English. I'm an English degree holder, an English major, and the first job I got out of college was teaching calculus because I understood the broad gamut of the maths, the sciences, and the arts. So that's what I love about liberal arts. And that's why I want to express that coming to you from a perspective of a non-tech person, whatever the right way to encompass that, I think that there's a lot of really great channels to become a tech person. The primary one being gaining confidence. So I did want to start with a poll, Sam. Maybe you can pull it up just to give you guys a preview. And there it is right away. I understand technology. I was kind of thinking of this as like a psychometric survey type reaction. So they're very simple. You don't have too many options. Just tell me what you feel, what you think. Do you understand? I understand technology. Yes, someone, or no? Okay, so looking at the poll results, a lot of somewhat, 74% somewhats, and a few no's and a few yeses. So my objective here is to give anyone who said somewhat, anyone who said no, give you guys the confidence, or a place to start with building confidence in saying, I understand technology. And I understand I did not define my terms. I will get into that a little bit, but the nebulousness of what a big thing we're talking about is actually really, it's part of the issue. So I will move forward with that, but I just want you to know my objective is to give you a mental model, background knowledge about tech and hard tech skills, and we'll get to those definitions in a second, so that you can feel confident telling your story about your interest in tech and your insight from your perspective of all the awesome things you've done into technology. So, but let's move forward. What are hard tech skills? There we go. So this is a little bit about me, and I'm an educator. I studied English, I told you guys that, and I really never presumed I would be in a position of confidence talking about technology. So my unlikely story to confidence started with my my Bachelor of Arts thesis, which was in literature because I studied English. It was about science fiction literature, and it was about androids in science fiction. Specifically, an android is a robot that is in the image of a human. And for me, that's fascinating. All the philosophical questions that opens up about what is human. What are the boundaries of humanness? So I started there in a very philosophical bent, and I've continued along that philosophical bent. But I also, thanks to a great friend from Chicago who studied physics, she really encouraged me to push me into the STEM realm, and I learned how to code thanks to her. And I do want to talk a little bit later on about what I mean by coding, because that's going to be part of our mental model. But part of that is I studied coding a programming language called Java at the University of Chicago. And but not in my undergrad. Actually, my undergrad, I got to withdraw failing in the tech class I tried to take. So but I've had this interest. I think many of you have had this interest for a long time. And there's I'm telling you this story to show the little baby steps I took towards, you know, becoming a more confident person in this realm. So I finally got to study through a program for teachers in the summers, Java. Later I studied R. And so having this foundational, you know, step by step through these programs, getting to understand coding by writing writing multiple languages, helped me synthesize my understanding. I eventually took a web development coding bootcamp, Lambda Bootcamp, and then I became a career advisor for a different coding bootcamp. So maybe my story is a little bit unlikely to my trajectory, but you know, if I can do it, I want everyone to feel confident that look for those opportunities. You know, have a great friend in physics to push you in that encourage you. But like look for those opportunities that may be unexpected, that you can use to take those baby steps. And that's why I think self-study is such an important first step. And I think it's important to recognize that you are the story you tell about yourself. So if you start the story with, oh, I'm not good at tech, I don't understand technology, you know, you're limiting yourself. So here we go. What are hard tech skills? So I'm going to answer that in the next slide. It definitely sounds like I'm drawing a comparison between soft and hard skills, right? Well, yes, I am. But we'll get to that next. What I'm going to talk about today is developing this mental model of technology at large, but also this divide that I'm proposing between hard and soft skills. We're also going to talk about creative comparisons in terms of language and data. And at the end of the talk is where I'm going to touch mostly on the options for study, like the self-study, coding boot camps, and university are the three options that I most easily envision and will be discussing with you. So soft tech skills is something that I would classify as being able to navigate software such as Zoom, such as Google Drive, knowing the ins and outs of a software program, basically, you know, fluency with clicks and knowing where to click and all that stuff. So it's super duper important. As we all know, it's you have to know how to use it, the software, to be able to become fluent and functional with it. But this is like procedural knowledge. And when we think about, as an educator, I think about Bloom's taxonomy. It's kind of low on that scale. So it's super important, but it's not the full picture. So if we want to become fully confident in, you know, I understand technology, we're also going to want to develop hard tech skills. And when I say hard tech skills, what I'm talking about, I also have the word navigating in here. So it's not that it isn't, you know, there aren't some simple levels on the identifying, understanding, defining level of understanding on Bloom's taxonomy. But what I look at here, we're navigating the command line, which is a way to talk to your computer, essentially. Instead of like clicking around for different items on your desktop or in files, you can actually say, hey, computer, bring up this file. But you know, there's a language for that. There's a syntax and a grammar and keywords for that. So you still are using navigating in lower level in Bloom's taxonomy skills, but you're also creating. I have building here in italics. You're not just knowing the ins and outs of a software program, you're building the actual software program. And specifically, I like to talk about web development for this hard tech skill. But there's also computer science, which is like and when I say but also, there's data science, et cetera, but what the building is what I'm talking about. That's the important part that for me distinguishes hard tech skills as a more complex skill than a procedural skill. So this is the type of thing you will learn in a coding bootcamp. This is the type of thing that you can teach yourself, but it's much harder if you don't have the mental model of what do I need to teach myself, because people get paid a ton of money to be curriculum developers at coding boot camps. So the comparison you'll note is fluency in clicks versus fluency. This is having the big picture in mind. This is being able to, you know, write an algorithm or an HTML file in a text editor. But I'll go on to the next slide. So how do we transition from, you know, moderate soft skills? And it doesn't matter where you are in the soft skill. The point is to and the soft tech skill. The point is to have that in conjunction with the hard tech skill, because you can always proceed in both arenas. But being completely without the hard tech skills, it's so hard to get the true mental model of what technology is. So moving from fluency with clicks to seeing the bigger future, the bigger picture, just to fluency in general, is definitely, you know, it depends on mental model, and it depends on, you know, dedicated interest. I was going to say study, but dedicated interest, searching for this and that, being allowing yourself to make connections to prior knowledge in your career that may or may not be traditionally seen as technology. For example, my undergraduate degree in English, I wrote a literary critique, but that just stemmed my whole interest in technology, in philosophy, and how it's all related. Okay, so what is technology? So basically, I asked myself first, I asked everyone via this presentation, what are hard tech skills? But we really have to go a step back to what is technology. And I'm going to offer a response to this in a few slides, but I think this is a great point for you to start thinking about yourself. Like, and on the later side, we'll ask an open-ended chat question, but what is technology? And I'm going to offer a little anecdote, a little aside to kind of lead up to my answer to that. So this is the first law of robotics. And it's Isaac Asimov is of course a science fiction author from the 50s and 60s. He's also, some people might not know, a PhD in chemistry. So I've heard that he's published in each of the 10 or however many Dewey Decimal categories. So he's just a prolific genius guy. And he says a robot may not injure, in his fiction, he says this, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. So the anecdote is about a story he wrote in I, Robot. It's a series of short stories, and one that really sticks out in my mind is where there's this character. She's a robot psychologist, and what an interesting job that might be. Because, you know, there's these robots, they help out, and I don't remember the exact scenario in which they're employees, and you know, she's figuring out, well, what's wrong with this robot? He's, you know, she's helping him adjust, and the robot, following the first law of robotics, is not clear with her about what's wrong with him, because he doesn't want to injure her. But the question that Asimov is bringing up, to what degree? Because he leads this robot psychologist to believe that her coworker is in love with her, and that robot did not want to injure her feelings. So there's so many levels of nuance in sci-fi, and so many levels of nuance in the way we relate to technology. And there's no real laws. This is the first law of robotics. That principles were developed in Asimov's world. And there's two others, and they all kind of add a corollary basically to this idea. But the question was, what is technology? And in my opinion, technology is in my opinion, I answered in an analogy. Technology is to 2020 as industry is to 1880. It's the zeitgeist, the social milieu, it's the economy, the literature, and it's everything. Okay, in our era. So, so if it's everything, everyone has an equal stake in what it is. Everyone has their own experience of technology and can bring their own insight and past experiences and career, life, etc. to bear. So this is where I want to pause. And I want to ask in the chat, can you please share with us, how did I word it exactly? Let's see. What aspects of your life have inspired your interest in tech? And the purpose of this question is to get you thinking about the story you're going to tell about yourself when someone asks you, why are you, or like, you know, oh, you're interested in going to a coding boot camp? Why? Tell me about yourself. And the way I kind of modeled my trajectory of interest in tech is something that would be really interesting to see you share. What aspects of your life have inspired your interest in tech? Gemma says, I'm starting my own business and conducting most of my marketing online. Suzanne says the ubiquity of it. It's everywhere. Exactly. There's a book by a science fiction author called his name is Philip K. Dick. The author, or the title of the book is Ubic, U-B-I-K. He's referring to ubiquity of a lot of things, but you know, the ubiquity of technology is how it is so relevant. Lenore says, career changing middle age, but long-time interest in programming. Teaching foreign languages could be related to coding languages. No. Judith, I totally agree with you. Language, human and computer, super duper related in terms of, they both have a grammar. In coding, we usually call that syntax to refer to all grammar, but absolutely, I'm gonna try to touch on that a little bit later. Mark says, oh, there's a lot of responses, so I'll try to look. Works in tech, but focus on my soft skills. Focuses on soft skills, but working with tech folks. I'd like to be able to relate more technically. Exactly, it doesn't have to be that you want to change careers, but it's just so valuable to have this mental model of the whole picture of what technology is, and especially this hard versus soft tech skill divide that I will continue to speak about. Starting your own business, better understanding how tech influences our lives. All aspects of life, education, travel, work, social, family, all that stuff. Teaching, advanced careers. So thank you guys so much for participating. I think that as we continue to look at our interests and tell the story about ourselves, doing so with confidence, practicing the story, that really defines where you're gonna go. Like the comfort with technology and in the story itself about, and I think everyone should feel totally validated in their interest and their insight as well into tech. Okay, next, so hard tech skills. So I alluded to this distinction between computer science and web development. This is an opinion I have, and I think if I explain it, many would agree. I think computer science is mathematics, especially in terms of algorithm writing. So let me give an example of what algorithms are. Kathy O'Neill is a former Wall Street person who is now, she wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. So she's like a data scientist. And so her example explanation of what an algorithm is it's like a series of decisions and a model. So for example, she says, when I make my kids dinner in a certain way, I want it to be healthy, but I want it to be easy. All these decision-making processes that that a computer, if I ask a computer to replicate, I'm going to tell it all these rules, and it's going to follow them, and it's, you know, hopefully going to create a dinner to our family liking. So another example of an algorithm in mathematics is sieve of Eratosthenes. So that refers to finding all the prime numbers up to a certain max number. And there's a series of rules and procedures, because you could do that in a lot of different ways. But according to the sieve of Eratosthenes, the way you do that is you identify the first prime number. So if every multiple of a prime, once you've identified a prime, you erase that from the list of up to the certain number. And so you go looking for your primes and you take out all the multiples, and that's how you compose your list, or you get rid of those, finding all those primes. So algorithms and mathematics and computer science I think of as a separate branch to what's more industry and business and web development and oriented. So computer science you're not really going to see in a coding bootcamp. Sure, it's like the underlying foundation of everything that the web is built off of, but it's more theory, I guess. It's more UChicago than, you know, we do have a comp sci major, we do not have a web dev major. So building software, websites, mobile apps, using the internet is what I put under web dev. And you're also will see other things that I'm using web dev as a catch-all for, like data science is offered at some coding boot camps. So when coding is a very nebulous word, but I tend to think of it as a more mathematical procedural language thing than a businessy. Actually, for me, web development is the modern printing press. Websites, building a website is you know, you're pushing stuff around using CSS, which is a way to, it's basically like, so you write your HTML, which is the words you put into a word processing document, if we're going to make that analogy. And then once you start bolding and highlighting and giving indenting, et cetera, formatting your page, that's what the CSS does in terms of making your page pretty. So that's the binary I see within hard tech skills. And you'll see this. So far I've just talked about the vertical, the horizontal top level. Also, I have in here language and data. Language is under computer science, and I appreciate the person who brought up the point about foreign languages in human languages and multiple coding languages for the technical realm. So there's a lot of different, for example, there's a lot of different languages you can use on the back end to hook up your website to a database. So when I mentioned Java, that's a language that can do something like that. But there's other languages with different syntax, meaning like the grammar, like the way you, what you like. So I'm gonna revert back to my English and Spanish knowledge. So, well, one thing we did was we learned the verb gustar as a two-form verb, meaning you can say me gusta or me gustan. So, and that reflects on whether you like one thing or multiple things, singular or plural. But actually, gustar can take all the forms. It's just a little bit more confusing than 7th or 8th grade level, because it's not just it is pleasing to me. It could be a ti te gusto, like do you like me? Am I pleasing to you? That changes the sense of the verb a little bit, but it can take more than two forms. And that's the gustar is a good example for this analogy to syntax and writing one language, and you put things in different places. So I like is normally the way we translate gustar, not I am pleasing, but I like cookies. Me gustan galletas. So galletas, the cookies, or the I like, me is like to me, it's pleasing to me. In English, the to me goes at the end. So that would be a good example of syntax in human languages being reorganized between languages, but it's the same effect if you know both languages. And so I would say the same idea in programming languages. So this is kind of the second part of the talk, where the conclusion of the second part of the talk, where we're making creative comparisons from our big mental picture of what technology is, what this difference between the procedural skills of soft tech and the complex synthesis and judgment skills of hard tech. So, and then data, I have that on here as well. That's a skill in a way to kind of know how to preserve the privacy that you want. Like, you can't do certain, like, accounts are shared if via your Gmail, you or whatever, you know, or email provider you use. Like, you have to be cognizant of all those different ways that data is gathered about you. So I think that hard tech skills are, and just like envisioning the divide between like what I can do with software versus being able to build software, it's just a useful place to start, and recognize that it's very, very valid to bring your past experience to tech and your interest in it. So this is just another example of creative comparison. Last year, I went to the Write Speak Code conference in San Francisco. And as the second word in the title of Write Speak Code indicates, speaking and practicing speaking is a part of this conference. So I took a session, I learned about creating a speech, and I got to present the little speech that I put together. And over the course of the day, I got a little 5-10 minutes to do so. And this was the title of my talk, which I'm really happy with. I thought it was pretty funny. Grammar is good, mechanics are garnish. And I like, okay, I'm laughing at my own little joke, but I like this, that the fact you substitute one letter, garnish turns to garbage. And that's not actually my opinion, like that mechanics are garbage, but garnish, yeah, because you know, they're the little parsley on the side of the plate in terms of communication. And I say that as an ESL teacher, a second language acquisition teacher. I say that as someone, a second language learner who had to learn Spanish. If I am getting my point across, I want you to please understand it without correcting my mechanics. And I gave this at, I didn't, you know, I said the little 10-minute speech at Write Speak Code last year because like I alluded to, there's multiple languages you can use, programming languages, to achieve the same end, to write the same algorithm, to, So this is in the creative comparison portion of the talk, because I want you to really be empowered to take your current interests and apply them to the technical realm. So I saw a lot of people were interested in business, starting their own business, you know, building your own website for your business. I did that. It was pretty empowering, let me tell you. So I think, but don't forget, like, where you, what you came through to remember, like, ask yourself, what is my aspect of my life that have led me to be interested in tech? And for me, it's language. It's absolutely language. And it's about accessibility. So I want lots of people to have the mental model that makes it possible to say, I understand technology. And for that reason, I say grammar is good. Like, the main idea that you get your communication across, that's great. Mechanics are garnish. So in human languages, if you don't express yourself perfectly in your second language or whatever it is, don't worry about it. Same with technology. Like, I think that multilingualism is something to be really, really celebrated. And in tech, it's just kind of like, yeah, of course I know multiple ways to do that, but I'd also like to make that point for human languages as well. So the next part of the talk is about these different ways to learn how to code, you know, for the general reference to tech skills. So these are the ways that make sense to me. And especially the order that they're in, I think, makes sense in terms of progress towards immersion. I will point out my own pun there. Immerse yourself by dipping your toe in first. And then after self-study, which can be difficult because, like I said about curriculum design, you don't know what you don't know. And that's really hard to figure out. So you can do a lot of research, but when you hit a dead end, that's the point where you might want to wade in a little bit with a coding bootcamp. And then in the next slides, I'll talk more about this. And then if at that point, you can, if you want to dive in, there's always a university degree. There's so much to learn and so much to experience and so many opportunities for learning. And that's why I'm going to go to the next slide about self-study. So here I have some resources. I think that Learn Enough by Michael Hartle. It's a tutorial basically, or it's like an online textbook with, it's just awesome. I would recommend it for the command line. That's what I've linked in there, because that's like if you can start already knowing the command line and go to a boot camp, and having a GitHub profile, you're going to be way ahead of the game, and that's awesome. And even if you just want to exclusively leave it at the self-study level, I think that's something that Michael Hartle did really well, is show. It used to be free when I did it, but now it's a subscription. But Learn Enough is a great resource, and I would start with the command line. I'm currently studying his Ruby, or his Ruby on Rails, and that's what he became famous for, is that one. So Stack Overflow is the name of a website where you can post problems and get tons of responses, or depending on how well phrased your question is or how interested people are. But more importantly than asking questions, it's like you can search it for questions that have already been asked and answered. And that really pairs well with the fourth one, Google search. I'm not being too flippant when I say that. It's really important, like to not feel like, oh, I should already know this answer. I don't know how to proceed. Like, to Google search is totally valid. Like, every programmer will tell you they use it every day. I use it every day. I teach Spanish and English. I speak Spanish and English. I use it every day to make sure that I spot check, like, this word, is this the best way? Does this word have an accent here? Like, yada, yada, like, just check. It's like I think, so that's a great resource. The docs I have right there, so I linked it specifically to Mozilla Developer Network, MDN, JavaScript map function, but it's way more general than that. That's why I put the quotation marks. Docs mean the documents that, like, for example, if you're learning React, which is a JavaScript framework, you're going to look at these docs that Facebook put out that they developed React. So it's the documentation for how it works, and it's the primary source essentially. So, and how do you find those? You Google them, or you follow this link, but only if you want to learn about map functions on JavaScript. But so self-study is super duper valuable. Best place to start, in my opinion, because it's the least monetary investment, although it's probably the most time investment and the most inefficient in a way, because you don't have your curriculum set up. But if you really want to learn to build a website and to code, and you don't have very much of a mental model or structure of how to fill in the gaps, I would recommend you attend a boot camp. So some reviews for decision making, how to decide what boot camp to go to, I put there. But I'm also going to say, what do I want you to know when you choose a boot camp? There's 3 things I just want to communicate. One being, who are your teachers? So the same way when you go to university, or when I took teaching jobs abroad, I would always ask, can you give me the email of another teacher who works at your school? I'd love to ask them a few questions. So I would recommend to you, go ahead, do your research online, search for who's your teacher, read about them, look at their GitHub. And by the way, GitHub is, it's just a place where you store code essentially, but you can look at other people's code really easily. So I would do all that, but then I'd also say, can I email this teacher? I just want to know their educational philosophy maybe they'll say no, maybe the bootcamp will say no, but I think knowing who your teacher is going to be is so important, because, and what their reputation is. And I guess that goes to, you could just look at these reports I have linked over here, like Career Karma or Course Report, because they have reviews on teachers, but I would want to know specifically who's going to be my teacher. And then the second thing I'd want to know, well, you can find this out online. How big is this bootcamp? Is it one of these models that it's really huge and I don't really know who to ask a question? Not that you don't, like, I'm not talking about the class size necessarily. I'm talking about more organizationally. But yeah, so if you're taking notes, I don't know, I just opened up the chat. I didn't mean to get distracted. GitHub, G-I-T, GitHub. So going back to step 2, yeah, find out how big is this organization, because if it's like kind of small, mom and pop, it's easy to, because these are super stressful, these boot camps, just because you're learning so much, it's really condensed. And if you have anything go wrong, heaven forbid, but you know, you need a little extra time, it's easier to be able to reach out to the person, and that could be with your teacher, but also just like the administration there, you want to feel like you can ask for what you need and that you'll be heard and listened to. So that's just my insight onto that. Like, think about how big is this boot camp. Think about who your teacher is. And finally, I want you to think about, so I want you to think about the career department. How accessible are they? How much programming do they already have decided? Like how fleshed out is their program for career development? So just, that's another question I would like you to ask if you're thinking about going to a coding bootcamp. You've done a lot of self-study, you kind of hit a wall, you got as far as you can go. The SIR report that I didn't mention is not such like a review, like a personal experience review. It's a ton of data, and that could be helpful to you. So I linked it there. And then we're wrapping up. The next option that I thought of that I wanted to talk about was, you know, you can get a university degree. And there's the only thing I'm going to really say about that is, you know, it's the gold standard for powerful impressions, and there's many options you can take to tech fluency, you know, going from procedural fluency with clicks to just fluency with technology. And I think that's important part of that is, you know, your perception of technology. I mean, it's the air we breathe more or less nowadays. Just like, you know, in 1880, it was industry. Now we're in the technical revolution. So I really am just, you know, over the moon about all the cool creative comparisons that are possible once you have this strong mental model of what technology is. And I'm going to conclude just by saying thank you. And I'm so, you know, grateful for your attendance, and I hope I maybe shed a little bit of light on your questions, any questions you might have. And I did include some further reading in terms of fiction and nonfiction, if any of this that I said was interesting to you. Thank you.
Emily, thank you so much. We've got some questions coming through, and to anyone on the line, if you have any questions that haven't gotten answered yet, please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit those. Let's start our moderated Q&A now. So first question, is there a hierarchy for tech job positions? For example, are there jobs with greater potential for career growth or maybe less potential?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, and then, but I wouldn't say, I think it depends more on your organization than the first title you get for your potential for growth. And it is very common in tech to, you know, just to switch organizations, looking for, you know, bump in salary or whatever that might be. So I would say, you know, from the perspective of someone who is a career advisor for a coding bootcamp, don't worry too much about your first title. Worry about the organization, how it's gonna promote you, see your value, and, you know, worry about the first salary they offer you.
Okay, great, thank you. And then here's another question from Victor. Can you be specific about which free or maybe relatively low cost courses to take? He mentions CS50 at Harvard on Coursera or Udemy. What about Udacity, nano degrees? I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of that right.
It sounded right to me. Okay, cool. Victor, thank you for the question, because it just introduced the fact to me that there's a middle ground between self-study and coding bootcamp. So considering I'm just thinking about this now, I probably don't have the best answer, but that's another step on that spectrum of immersion. So I cannot be specific about which ones to take. That is part of the curriculum, the difficulties of self-developing a curriculum. But good question.
Great, thank you. And then let's see, here's another question from Isaac. I was always stronger in the humanities. Is there maybe a free test that I could take online to see if I'm a good fit for the tech industry? Or maybe perhaps a larger question, Emily, is there a way that people can kind of help make the decision as they're thinking about making a pivot about whether the tech industry is right for them?
Okay, so in terms of the industry itself and just like pivoting careers and a new career focus, I would think about your capacity for stress to because like in terms of what's really great and what's really difficult. I have never been employed as a programmer, a software developer, but they from my experience as a career advisor and having friends in the industry, I would say that you're gonna just come up against a lot of struggles and realizing that. What your question really made me think of is, if you're gonna pivot, you really want to have that resiliency, let's say, this ability to withstand stress for the coding bootcamp period. So right out, I love that you're thinking ahead for, is this career going to be right for me? But is it the right route to take a coding bootcamp to change careers? Because it's one thing to take a coding bootcamp to learn more, but it's so stressful to take a coding bootcamp to change careers. And I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm not saying it's not awesome, but keep that in mind. If that's the point you're at, like I've explored my self-study options, I'm considering a coding bootcamp, because I think in order to have low levels of stress as low as possible when you're committing to a coding bootcamp, you want to have really solid idea of what finances they're going to be requiring of you and how long you can go during the job search. Because sure, maybe it's only a 3-month program, but it's always like 6 months. If you get a job within 6 months, that is a super duper successful outcome. So it could be the next day, or it could be 5 months and 29 days later. That is a successful outcome for the bootcamp. So it's not just do I have money to survive while I'm studying for 3 months. It could be potentially much longer.
Here's another great question. What are the best programming languages to learn in your mind? How do you stay relevant knowing that the industry changes so quickly and everything could soon change?
That's a cool question. So I promoted multilingualism in the talk, but as from the specific perspective that I come from, JavaScript, just because it's used in all websites. All browsers use JavaScript. So start there, absolutely. But if something else calls your name and is super interesting to you, do that too. And when I say JavaScript, that's the programming languages. But if you want to start easier than that and work towards web dev, start with HTML, start with CSS. Or if you're more a math mind person, that's more like the website, the printing press that I talked about. But if you are like an algorithm person and there's cool stuff to do in JavaScript, do that. Yeah, that's those three all kind of are the same thing. Those are the internet: HTML, CSS, JavaScript.
And then when it comes to Coursera certificates, how do you think that they stack up if you choose maybe not to go to a university or choose not to go to a boot camp?
I think it's going to be tougher with a Coursera certificate than even a boot camp. I think you get a really big return on investment. Comparing between a Coursera certificate and a boot camp, because they have like a career department and all that stuff. So if I understood the question being, can a Coursera certificate get me a job? Not as readily as a boot camp could. And but it's a nice thing to add after, you know, after you like to continue learning. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying I don't think that's acknowledged as widely. If you have the skill, first of all, if you have the skill, that's what's acknowledged. So I'll finish answering the question there.
Awesome. And can you get a little specific in terms of what boot camps are maybe highly regarded in the industry, and what recommendations you might have for folks online?
I think there's a lot of really, really good boot camps out there. The one I attended was great. The one I worked at was great. So I don't think I would recommend anyone specifically, but what I would absolutely recommend is doing your research. So those 3 things I said were, who's your teacher going to be? How big is the boot camp in terms of your needs and your accessibility to admin or any decision makers? And in that, you know, how big could go the other way? It could be, you know, I want to meet a ton of people and network. So think about it that way too. And then the last point I made about that was, do they have a career department? What's the reviews on the career department?
And as people start going through this, as they start doing, you know, some of their own self-study and maybe getting certificates, how would you recommend describing these self-study or these coursework on your resume? Is there a way that you can position it to really stand out on your resume and maybe start to look equivalent to a boot camp or a university degree?
Good question. I think about that a lot. So the way I approach that is I put my Lambda School education under education. And on my LinkedIn too, I put it in reverse chronological order. So some people are like, oh, my university degree is more important, even though it was earlier, I'm going to put it before. If you want it to be weighted with respect and you know, this was an important educational moment, use all the standards and just resume standards, reverse chronological order. Under education, you could put your education section to the top if you're a new software dev and you don't have any experience in software development. You know, put your education at the top. I think that answers the question. Ask me again if it was confusing.
Oh, that's great. And I would also add too, if you're the kind of person who likes having a summary on your resume and maybe you're using this as some sort of a career change, or if you're using it to just amplify the soft skills that you already have, the summary section could be a great way to describe what you've gotten out of the courses, the boot camps, at your self-study, however much you've done so far. It's a good way to put it into a narrative on your resume.
Totally agree. That makes me think of a time. So I alluded to the robot psychologist. I actually use that once as on my resume, because like future robot psychologist, like it was couched with other things too, but like put those things on there that are the interest, the insight that you really have and makes you interesting. And that's a pretty crazy thing to put on a resume, but super interested in it.
I kind of love it. Eye-catching and conversation starting, and that's what you want out of a resume. We've got a couple questions here about the details on your slides. So I just want to confirm, Emily, you said that you would be comfortable sharing the slides, correct, with the people on the line? Okay, great.
Pretty sure they don't have any typos.
We won't judge the typos. But yeah, for everyone on the line, I will be sending out a link to download these slides and all the links that Emily has mentioned on them. So no need to take screenshots or anything like that. Okay, wonderful. And then let's see, what other questions do we have coming in here? So one of our questions on the line here, are there any online learning options, perhaps like Lynda, available through libraries? Do you recommend any specific courses to understand how technology and the internet work today?
So are there online resources like Lynda for learning about tech? Is that right, Sam? Okay, I don't know what Lynda is, I apologize. I think you said it was through the library. So I think libraries are an awesome place to start. So you can look online for those resources for programming they may have, nowadays. But I remember when I was looking at my library, they had a newsletter, a tech newsletter, and like they would have Excel courses once a month, beginning and advanced. So I think like my recommendations may be few and far between for specific resources. I did put them on the slides, but I think that this self-study, you know, like if you were to jump into that command line course, you'd find, you know, your interest is this like river that leads you to, you know, your career and your whatever. So just follow your interest, follow your passion, but you know, relate that interestingly, you know, with the story that you tell about your life, how you have these past interests that lead to your current tech interests. So as far as resources, you may have tapped me out.
Awesome. And we're going to end with one final question. And this is going to be everyone's first little intro into tech here. We got a question. What is a command line?
Cool. Okay. So the way I was like making the analogy before is that it is the way you talk to the computer. So and I said, okay, you can look for different files instead of like browsing with the graphic user interface, the GUI. You are going to actually say to the computer, PWD, that means print working directory, and that will tell you where you are. So instead of just being like looking at your screen and saying, okay, I'm currently in downloads, PWD, print working directory, I am in downloads. Oh, okay, that's the folder I'm in. So it's just an a way of talking to the computer instead of using the graphical user interface, clicking, you know, fluency with clicks. This is not, it's fluency. It's knowing, so if you have a Mac, click on Spotlight and search for, it's not command line, oh no. Search, pues, I do not remember what you're gonna wanna search for, and I apologize. But, because it's called a program, but the fact that the command line is like the general term for being able to talk to the computer. And if you search for, you know, how to access the command line on Mac and on PC, I wouldn't know how to recommend that you do that either. You'll get some procedural steps, which I'm sure you can follow. But the thing is, how do you know what to say to the computer? That's not quite a language, but it's like you have to learn, you know, PWD, print working directory. That's how I know where I'm at. It's a great way to start talking to your Mac.
Awesome. Unfortunately, my Mac does not speak English, so I'll have to send him a command line. All right. Well, Emily, thank you so much. To everyone on the line, thank you so much for attending.